three things went through my mind when the news broke on the 6 o'clock news last night. The first was, even when you get an early diagnosis, as thankfully I think the King has, it's still terrifying. And all sorts of anxieties rush through your mind. And it doesn't matter whether you are the King or anyone else. It's a terrifying experience to have a cancer diagnosis. And the second thing is, I thought back to my own experience. I kind of knew that I was going to be okay. My prognosis was good. It was harder for my family, actually. And I think that for his family, they will probably feel the similar wave of emotions that my family felt, which was fear, concern, and also a bit of helplessness as well. You want to be able to do something, you want to be able to make it better, but ultimately you have to trust in the care of the professionals. And thirdly, it's, as anyone who's been through this, and 1 in 2 of us will, be affected directly by cancer in our lifetimes, and in fact probably all of us in the country has been touched by cancer in our lives through someone we love. To go through that in the full glare of the public eye is bloody difficult. And I mean, I did a statement at the beginning of my cancer journey because I felt I had to, and I'd be conspicuous in my absence, and I'd start getting emails, why weren't you at X vote, why weren't you at Y community event, and the King will get that in bucket loads, and even there've been even people saying, well, can't we know what type of cancer? No, I don't think we can actually, and I don't think we should, and I think it's up to the King to decide how much he wants to share, and I think he's owed, and the family are owed, privacy as they deal with this, as any other family would. And I think it's easy to forget that beyond the institution and the crown, they are ordinary people going through the same wave of emotions that other families going through cancer are. And I hope they take some comfort in the knowledge that right across the country and throughout the Commonwealth, there are millions of people who know what they're going through and are sending them unconditional support and love.
And thank you for your personal reflections. I think it's really important to hear that. I suppose there is a kind of wider political/NHS point to be made here, because he's been diagnosed with this, as you say, sort of incidental cancer, this unknown cancer, following what on the NHS would have been an elective operation. Waits are now so big in England, around 27,000 people will have an incidental cancer like him, but will not yet know that because they've not been seen. Is there a concern here that we live in a country where the King can afford to be saved, but ordinary people are being ignored?
Well, I've made the case previously about the size of the NHS waiting list and my anxiety about undiagnosed cancer within that elective backlog. And in my own case, my kidney cancer was diagnosed because I went into A&E in the early hours of the morning with huge pain, which ended up being kidney stones, as I call them, my lucky kidney stones. Thank God for those kidney stones, because otherwise I could be talking to you now with cancer and no idea, and it'd been metastasizing and spreading. And I don't want to, personalise this around one individual. Look at what's happened after 14 years of Conservative government. We do have a 2-tier health system in this country, where those who can afford it pay to go private and those who can't get left behind. And that goes against everything that I believe in, and I think our country believes in terms of fairness and equity and access to healthcare. And it's one of the reasons why, by the way, why I've said a Labour government, to bring those waiting lists down faster, would use spare private sector capacity and buy it on behalf of the public, so that those who can't afford to pay to go private can get seen faster at no cost themselves. So they get it on NHS terms, free at the point of use, but they might get it up the road at the private hospital. It's not ideal. And I don't think it's the long-term solution to the NHS crisis, but it would deal with the 2-tier challenge while we deliver 2 million more appointments a year to cut the backlog and get back to where we were. I mean, Rishi Sunak keeps on saying, you'll go back to square one with Labour. Well, let me tell you, folks, square one with Labour was the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history. But by all means, go on with more of the same of Rishi Sunak if you want to wait longer.
Let's consider some of the Times Health Commission findings today. You've been speaking there. You've been kind of digesting all of this. And actually, I kind of want to start at the end, if I may. If we kind of run a bit of a hypothetical, if you become the Health Secretary at some point this year, if you remain Health Secretary for a parliamentary term, What do you want your legacy as Health Secretary to be? What do you want people to think Wes Streeting was the Health Secretary who did what and achieved what?
I think two things. One is by the end of the first term of a Labour government, I would want to have seriously reduced NHS waiting lists and restored. Well, I mean, I think we can deliver 2 million more appointments a year at evenings and weekends. I would want to see millions of people off the NHS waiting lists, and I would want those basic performance standards of, ambulance response times, A&E waiting times to resemble far more closely what we had in 2010 after 13 years of Labour government than we've had after 14 years of Conservative government. But more than that, and this is the real change that I would want to lead, we have got to make sure that we have a serious long-term plan for reform of the NHS. And the three big shifts I want to see: a shift of the centre of gravity of the NHS out of hospital into the community, so that we have more general practice, more community pharmacy, community mental health hubs in every community, more support available in people's homes through district nursing, community services, a shift from analogue to digital, so at the cutting edge of life science and technology, and a real shift from sickness to prevention, so we've got good public health policies. And I'm not messianic enough or naive enough to think that I alone am the answer and we're going to solve all these problems and it'll all be thanks to me. There's no I in team. And on this question, we can only do this if we pull people together, not just the more than 1 million people who work in the NHS and social care, but working in partnership across business and civil society with a serious long-term plan to improve the health of our nation. And I hope that people would look back on my time as Health Secretary, if I'm lucky enough to hold that post, and say, yeah, that was the time when the NHS really turned around and went from the worst crisis in its history to being on the path to being the best healthcare system in the world.
So let's consider then where kind of Labour are at with all of this. We've heard from Sir Keir Starmer today on Times Radio saying that Labour's plan to invest £28 billion in green infrastructure is desperately needed. He's denied he's scaling back that kind of manifesto commitment that's been swirling now for weeks. How intimidated are you by the battle that awaits you to get spending plans for health through Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules?
Well, before we even get to Rachel Reeves, people have to get through me, and they have to persuade me that the money that's going into the system is being as well spent as it could be. And take Rishi Sunak's interview with Piers Morgan this week. Beyond the controversy about his £1,000 bet on the Rwanda scheme, which I thought was pretty vulgar, he said something shocking, which was an admission that he's broken his pledge on waiting lists. But he defended it by saying, but I'm putting record amounts of money into the NHS. So he's basically saying, I know I've broken my promises, but I've spent a hell of a lot of money doing it. And I think it should sober us as a nation to acknowledge the fact we've never spent more on the NHS, and yet it's never been in deeper crisis. And I know that money is part of the challenge, and that's why we've made a number of really big commitments on investment, fully costed, fully funded. £1.6 billion into the NHS to cut waiting lists, to provide more emergency dental care, and to double the number of diagnostic scanners, and another £750 million on top for mental health services in every school and community mental health hubs and more staff. It's a big chunky investment, that. But the lesson of the last Labour government is that it's investment and reform that delivers results. And what the Conservatives have failed to understand is that just pouring more money into the model as it isn't going to work. You have to do the reform alongside it. And one of the shocking things I thought in the Times Health Commission was where Sajid Javid, the former health secretary, said fundamental change was needed. But he said he was told, and I quote, "The second most important thing you must know as Secretary of State is that most people believe it's not working, it's not delivering." And Sajid Javid said, "So it's my job to fix it without touching it." I mean, what a striking admission. I think it's a sort of reminder that because the Conservatives aren't trusted with the NHS, they are incapable of leading the reform of the NHS. And I think we've got to a point now where if experience hasn't already taught us as a country that you cannot trust the Conservatives with the NHS, that they're not going to do the right thing, at least contrast 14 years of Conservative government with the worst NHS results in history with where we were with the last Labour governments, which is, the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction ever.
The Health Secretary Victoria Atkins on Times Radio today said, they've got an elective recovery plan, they've got extra beds, they've got testing units to try to sort of circumnavigate some of the bureaucracy, I suppose, that still exists. You mentioned on the investment part. Is Rachel Reeves happy with your plans? They're nodded, they're fully funded?
I can happily say they're fully costed and fully funded, right. And if they weren't, and I was announcing them or committing to them, I would find myself banished. Like one of the unsuccessful faithfuls on traitors. No, and there's a serious point here, by the way. The public finances they really are in a mess after the Conservatives' mismanagement. So let's not pretend this is just sort of big bad Rachel Reeves being mean to the shadow cabinet and holding us to fiscal discipline. We're all with Rachel 100%. We know that one of the many challenges that we will face is getting the public finances back in order, getting the economy working again, because people like me and Rachel understand, because of our backgrounds and where we come from, me from a very working class background, Rachel from a pretty ordinary background, know that when money's tight, and we've both seen our parents having to carefully balance their finances, we have a responsibility to spend taxpayers' money as carefully and wisely as those families that are making some really difficult choices right now. So this is not a case of Rachel Reeves being uniquely mean-spirited. This is a collective Labour team that understands the public finances are in a mess, and it's our collective responsibility to get the economy working again.
A couple more things, just to very quickly get through. You're being very generous with your time, and we've kind of touched on some of the 10 recommendations, actually, just by way of conversation from the Times Health Commission. One of them that we want to talk about is staff retention and recruitment. Writing off student loans for doctors, nurses and midwives who stay in the NHS to improve retention as well as recruitment is one of the recommendations. Debt should be cut by 30% for those who stay 3 years, 70% for those who stay 7 years, and 100% for those who stay 10 years. Now, I noticed when you were speaking in front of the Commission a little while ago, you were enthused by this idea but didn't quite commit to it, Wes. Again, kind of citing public finances. How quickly do you think you might be able to commit to that?
Yeah, I was about to say, I refer you to my previous answer, and this is exactly the sort of thing where Rachel Reeves would appear and say, hang on a minute, what are you going around committing to?
One of Labour's fiscal credibility rules is Labour will borrow only to invest. Is there not an argument that you could borrow here, write off these loans at these percentages, and that is a huge investment in the future of the NHS and the health of the nation?
Well, as I say, I think the Health Commission has made a really interesting argument here that speaks to one of the key challenges. But I wasn't joking when I said that to the Health Commission event that there are difficult choices to be made and to weigh up, and student finance policy, having worked in this area myself in the past, it's hugely complicated, and you've got to look at the whole student finance system in the round, not in isolation. So I'm sort of not ruling it out, but you will never find me or anyone else in the shadow cabinet doing is making spending commitments that aren't fully costed and fully funded. And that's really important, as I say, not just because of the state of the public finance, but because of trust in politics. I'm not going to make any promises this side of the election without being 100% sure that we can keep those promises. And that's important, not just in terms of discipline with the public finances, but also in rebuilding public trust in politics. And if there's one thing that's in even shorter supply than money in our country at the moment, it is trust in politics. So I hope that from that answer, what your listeners will take is we are in the market for good ideas, but when Labour makes commitments and you pick our manifesto up at the general election and you see the pledges in there, you will have confidence that they're fully costed and fully funded. And I dare say there'll be loads of good ideas that don't make the cut for the manifesto because we've either concluded they wouldn't be able to be delivered within the first term of the Labour government, or they wouldn't be able to be afforded within the first term of a Labour government. And I think that is the right and responsible thing to do, both to manage the public finances effectively, but also to rebuild public trust in politics.
The manifesto submission deadline's tomorrow, I believe. What's line 1 of the health section going to be?
I would definitely get in trouble
go on.
with an even greater power than Rachel Reeves if I was to start talking.
There's no greater power than Rachel Reeves.
Well, let me tell you, Keir Starmer would have something to say to me if I started started kind of briefing out Labour's health section of the manifesto. What I can tell you though, and I think what people have picked up with from the sort of the drumbeat of speculation about Labour's manifesto, is we're taking this process really seriously, and we're taking Labour's credibility in terms of the promises we make, making sure they can be kept, making sure they can be afforded, really seriously. And I think what the Labour manifesto will do is create that necessary bridge from where we are today, the country in a terrible state and trust in politics at rock bottom, a bridge to the future, that decade of national renewal that Keir Starmer's talked about. So there's no shortage of ambition in the Labour Party. There is a shortage of money and there is a shortage of trust in politics. And unless we overcome those first two things, we are not going to get the bridge we need through a Labour government to that decade of national renewal that our country is crying out for.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.